The day the settlers came to us about the land was one we had seen coming for some time. Their presence in the valley was no surprise. They scouted like hawks, moving up and down the river, searching for what they believed was perfection. When they approached us, we listened patiently as they described their plans: farming, building, prospering. They admired the soil, the river, the trees. Their offer was clear and we agreed: 30 coats. The settlers looked at one another, puzzled. They had been through countless negotiations, always long and drawn out, but not this time. They didn't know what we knew. This land, for all its beauty, was troubled. The spirits here were restless, as if the land itself resisted being tamed. Crops failed in inexplicable ways, and the river, though bountiful, held a darkness that we had learned to avoid. We were not abandoning the land, we were setting ourselves free from its burden. We knew they saw only opportunity. But as we watched them celebrate the deal, we wondered how long it would take before they too felt the weight of the unseen forces that lingered here. When they left, their joy hung in the air, and we stood silent, knowing that this land, as rich as it seemed, carried a price far greater than any trade could settle. When the settlers first approached us about purchasing the land, we watched them closely. Their faces lit up with excitement as they spoke of building homes, farming, and prospering here. They did not understand what they were asking for. This land was more than soil and trees. It was a place of warning, a place of power, and one that carried the voice of Hobomok, the spirit who resided deep within the earth. We agreed to their offer. It was a simple exchange, and though they seemed wary of our eagerness, they didn't ask the right questions. How could we explain to them what we had always known? The sounds they would hear, the movements beneath their feet, they were not mere oddities, but the voice of a being far older and more formidable than they could comprehend. 2 weeks after they arrived, it began. The first rumble came in the dead of night, shaking their fragile homes and rattling their windows. They came to us in confusion and fear, and we told them the truth. This was Hobomok's domain, a spirit who spoke through the earth with the force of cannon fire, a serpent coiled in the heart of the mountain. We told them of our ceremonies, our prayers and our sacrifices, acts we had long performed to keep the spirit at peace. But they only listened with skeptical ears, dismissing our warnings as superstition. They did not see the wisdom in our ways, nor did they understand the gravity of living alongside a force like Hobomok. As the years passed, they built their mills and factories, filling the land with the hum of industry. Yet through it all, the sounds continued. Rolling thunder, sharp explosions, groans from the depths. Hobomok's voice was unyielding, a reminder that no matter how much they tried to tame this place, it would never truly belong to them. Even when strange men like the alchemist Dr. Steele came with their fantastical theories, the settlers clung to their belief in reason and control. But we knew better. We had lived with the spirit's presence for generations, interpreting its messages and honoring its power. The settlers' ignorance was their choice, and it was one they would have to live with. We watched as they ignored the warnings and pushed forward. Perhaps they thought they could conquer the land. Perhaps they thought their explanations would silence the spirit. But Hobomok does not speak to be silenced, and the land remembers. Always. We'd always known that this land held mysteries beyond comprehension, but the settlers' arrival only added to the strange tales tied to this place. When the man they called Dr. Steele appeared, claiming to understand the cause of the noises, we could feel the shift in the air. His words carried the arrogance of someone trying to explain the inexplicable, yet the townsfolk clung to his theories like drowning men grasping at straws. Dr. Steele spoke of a glowing stone, a carbuncle he called it, that lay deep beneath the earth. He claimed it was the source of the sounds, its energy resonating through the ground like the voice of a restless spirit. We watched from a distance as he wandered the settlement, showing smaller glowing stones to the townspeople, tokens he claimed were fragments of the larger gem. The settlers were awestruck, eager to believe in a physical explanation for the noises rather than facing the truth we had always known. The spirit of Hobomok was alive and powerful. They could call it a stone or a carbuncle, but it was the spirit's voice, ancient and untamed, that they were hearing. Then, one day, Dr. Steele announced that he had discovered a way to extract the stone from the ground. His declaration rippled through the settlement, bringing a mix of hope and fear.
I can only remove part of the stone, leaving behind a smaller fragment. The noises will continue, but with less intensity.
His words hung in the air, a promise and a warning, as the settlers grappled with the reality of what lay beneath their feet.
And just as suddenly as he had arrived, Dr. Steele vanished. The settlers waited for days, then weeks for his return, but he was gone. Strangely, many of them began to claim that the noises had diminished, becoming less frequent and less powerful, just as he had predicted. They took this as a sign that his work had succeeded. But we knew better. Whatever had changed, it was not the removal of a glowing stone. Perhaps Hobomok had simply quieted, biding his time, or perhaps the settlers had convinced themselves of their victory. Yet we remained watchful, knowing that this land and its spirit could never be fully tamed. The settlers called them the Moodus noises and turned them into tales to share with outsiders. But we knew the truth, that the voice of the earth is not something to silence or explain away. It is something to respect, for it holds the power to remind us of forces far greater than ourselves. The settlers were determined to explain the unexplainable, and now even the men of science have tried to do the same. They say the Moodus noises are caused by small earthquakes, the grinding of ancient rock under pressures so deep and old that their movements still echo today. They speak of frequencies and seismic waves, trying to tame the spirit of the land with their measurements and terms. But no matter how they explain it, the truth remains. Standing in East Haddam at night, hearing the groaning and hissing rising from beneath the earth, the air feels charged with something more than geology. Those who listen closely cannot deny the sense of being watched, of standing in a place where the veil between worlds grows thin. We knew this. Long before their tools and their words, we knew that these sounds were not merely vibrations in stone. They were warnings, whispers from Hobomok, and the unsettled forces that live deep within the earth. Science may have given the settlers comfort, but those who truly listen can still feel what we felt, what we have always known. Perhaps one day, even the most skeptical among them will stop and wonder if Hobomok is still watching, still speaking, waiting for the moment when his voice will rise again to remind the world of his presence. Let them explain the noises as they will. We will keep the stories and the ceremonies, for the land has never forgotten, and neither will we. The settlers and their descendants think they understand the land now, mapping it with roads and naming its parts as though the spirit within could be so easily tamed. Yet even today there are moments when the land reminds them that it remembers. As I watch the newcomers pass through this place, these outsiders with their bright lights and noisy machines, I can see the unease in their faces. They feel it too, though they cannot name it. The weight of the air, the way the trees seem to lean in, the silence that presses too tightly around them. They don't understand, but the land knows. When they pass through the small towns, the people who stand in their yards and on the roads are not strangers to the feeling. They too know what it is to live on ground where the spirits whisper and watch. The outsiders feel judged, stared at, but they don't realize it's not the people who are watching them, it's the land. As the couple finally reaches the campsite, they are greeted by emptiness. A swamp spreads out before them, dark and silent, a void where they had hoped for beauty and serenity. They think they are alone, but they are mistaken. The land is never empty. Then the ranger arrives, his voice tight, his eyes wary. He hesitates before speaking as though weighing the words that might warn them or scare them away. The land's presence is felt most strongly by those who live closest to it, and this ranger, like the townsfolk, knows better than to take it lightly. And yet they stay. They believe themselves safe, shielded by their truck and camper, their lights and human-made comforts. But the land is patient. It has always been patient. It waits for those who come uninvited, reminding them in whispers and shadows that some places are not meant to be tamed. We have always known, we have always listened, and perhaps in time, even they will come to understand that this place is not theirs to own. It belongs to the spirits, and it always will. The land remembers, and it sees those who tread upon it without reverence. When the outsiders decided to leave the park, they thought they were escaping the unease that had settled over them like a shadow. But the land is not bound by borders or fences. It stretches beyond what their maps can define, carrying with it the spirit of the hunter. As they drove through the darkness, the road swallowed by trees and silence, the land spoke to them in ways they couldn't ignore. The bump on the road was its whisper, urging them to look, to see. And when the man stepped out to investigate, the spirit was waiting, hidden in the stillness of the night. He brought with him his weapon, believing it would protect him from whatever lay in the shadows. But the spirit of the hunter is not deterred by human tools. It has walked these lands longer than memory, a guardian of the wilderness, a predator that understands its place in the cycle far better than the humans do. When the man saw the creature's eyes, glowing like twin embers in the dark, he saw not fear, but purpose, a cold, calculating hunger. It was no ordinary beast, and deep down, he knew it. This was something ancient, something that had roamed the land before his kind arrived, a being that still claimed dominion over the wilds. The creature's movements were deliberate, unnatural, almost mocking. It pushed off the rock with ease, its body shifting, rising. On two legs it stood like a shadow given life, its form a reminder that not everything in the woods is meant to be understood. The land was watching. The hunter was waiting. And as the man stood frozen in place, he became part of the story the land tells over and over again, a story of trespassers who dared to challenge the ancient balance. When he finally retreated, the man may have thought he escaped. But the land does not forget. The spirit does not forget. And for those who dare to return, the hunter will always be there waiting. David and Lisa hurried toward their truck, the unsettling stare of the man in the nearby vehicle weighing heavily on them. The man didn't flinch, his eyes following their every step like a hawk watching its prey. David felt his heart rate quicken, his hands reflexively clenching as they neared their vehicle. "David, get in," David said quietly, his voice firm but laced with tension. Lisa didn't hesitate, slipping into the passenger seat and locking her door. David moved to the driver's side, but before he could climb in, the man in the other truck rolled down his window. "Mysterious man, you shouldn't have stopped," the man said in a low, gravelly voice, his words carrying across the silent parking lot. "David, what are you talking about?" David froze mid-step, his voice steady but cautious. "Mysterious man, you saw it, didn't you? The beast. Or maybe, the beasts." The man tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth twisting into a smirk. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment David thought he saw something strange flicker in them, a glint of something unnatural, like the glow of the creature's eyes. David's mind raced. Was this man just some local trying to scare him, or did he truly know something? "David, I don't know what you're talking about," David replied, forcing a tone of indifference. "Mysterious man? Sure you don't, but let me give you a little advice. Keep moving, don't stop again, no matter what you think you hear or see, and don't go telling anyone what you saw tonight. People who do, they don't usually stick around for long." David didn't respond. He climbed into the truck, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. Lisa watched him silently, sensing the tension radiating off him. "Lisa, what did he mean, David?" she finally asked, her voice trembling. "David, I don't know," David lied. But deep down he had a sinking feeling that the man knew exactly what had happened out there, and that this wasn't over. As they drove away, Lisa couldn't shake the image of the man's piercing gaze, and David, despite his best efforts to dismiss it, couldn't stop thinking about the creature's glowing eyes, its towering form, and the growl that had seemed to echo from the depths of something ancient and primal. The road stretched out ahead of them, but the shadow of what they had encountered lingered, following them into the night. As he parked his truck on the edge of the swamp, the man couldn't shake the eerie tension that had clung to him since his last hunting trip. It was supposed to be routine, a quiet evening scouting deer, but what he'd encountered was anything but ordinary. He hadn't spoken about it to anyone. Who would believe him? A giant wolf-like creature prowling the swamp wasn't exactly a campfire tale you shared without drawing skeptical stares. He spotted the young man walking toward him and decided to lighten the moment. The resemblance to an old friend was uncanny, and he thought, maybe I'll have some fun, tease him a bit. But as the stranger approached, the reality of his mistake hit him. Man, oh my God, I am so sorry. You look just like a buddy of mine, he blurted, nervously laughing to cover his embarrassment. David, no problem, happens all the time. The stranger, David, he later learned, smiled disarmingly. That simple reply and his calm demeanor put the man slightly at ease. They exchanged small talk, but the unease he carried lingered. Then David's eyes shifted, catching sight of the rifle rack. David, so, you ever do any hunting? The question froze him. Hunting. That word carried a weight it never used to. His head dropped, and memories of that fateful night flashed through his mind. The glowing eyes in the darkness, the unnatural howl, the grotesque shadow that moved like a nightmare brought to life. David, do you ever do any hunting in the swamp? David pressed gently, his curiosity genuine. The man's heart skipped a beat. Did he know? Had he seen it too? Unable to suppress the truth any longer, he whispered, Man, I thought I was the only one. David's expression shifted slightly as if he were bracing himself for what would come next. Encouraged, the man began to recount the encounter, every horrifying detail tumbling from his lips. The glowing eyes, the massive wolf-like frame, the way the creature seemed to stalk him as if it knew no fear. As he spoke, David's face changed, not in disbelief, but recognition. He nodded along, his expression a mirror of the terror the man had carried in silence for weeks. He knows, the man realized. He's seen it too. For a brief moment, the weight on his chest lifted. He wasn't alone. Someone else understood the primal fear of facing a creature that shouldn't exist. But the conversation haunted him long after David left. Their shared understanding begged bigger questions. Could this monstrous creature have deeper roots, perhaps in the mystery of the lost Roanoke colony? The man had heard the legends but dismissed them as stories. Now he wasn't so sure. Even as the truck rumbled to life and the swamp receded in his rearview mirror, the man felt the weight of the unknown settle back onto his shoulders. The swamp's secrets weren't just legends. They were alive, and they were watching.
The biting chill of January air brushed against Charles McCullers' face as he stepped out of the car, his breath forming faint clouds in the brisk morning. The driver, a kind stranger, gave him a wave before disappearing down the winding road. Charles adjusted the strap of his camera bag, his most prized possession, and turned toward the dense forest surrounding Crater Lake.
This is it, he thought, his heart pounding with anticipation. The cobalt waters of America's deepest lake lay ahead, shrouded in whispers and ancient mystery. The stories about the lake only added to its allure. Locals spoke in hushed tones of its sinister reputation, warning against gazing too long into its mesmerizing depths. Charles dismissed their fears with a wry smile. He wasn't here to fear the lake. He was here to capture its beauty, to immortalize its secrets through his lens.
Standing 8,000 feet above sea level, he took in the vastness of the crater. It was unlike anything he'd ever seen. A liquid abyss, its surface eerily calm, the surrounding cliffs casting jagged shadows. He raised his camera, framing the scene.
A natural masterpiece, he thought. Every shot felt like a piece of eternity preserved. But something tugged at the edges of his mind as he ventured deeper into the forested trails surrounding the lake. A strange stillness seemed to hang in the air, broken only by the crunch of snow beneath his boots.
He brushed the unease aside. It's just the solitude, he told himself. He had trekked through wilderness before. He knew the tricks isolation could play on the mind.
Still, he couldn't ignore the growing weight in his chest. The forest felt alive, almost sentient, its towering pines looming like silent guardians. As he ventured further, the snow thickened and the landscape grew more treacherous. His mind wandered to the stories of the indigenous tribes who had avoided the lake for centuries. Could there be truth to the legends?
When the sun began to dip below the horizon, he stopped to rest, his fingers trembling from the cold as he adjusted his gear. He had promised his friends he'd return in 2 days, but the thought of turning back now felt wrong. He was so close to capturing the perfect shot, to uncovering what others had missed.
That night, the temperature plummeted, and the forest transformed into an icy labyrinth. Charles huddled by a makeshift fire, its flickering flames barely holding back the darkness. Shadows danced among the trees, their movements almost too deliberate. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to remain calm.
"It's just the wind," he whispered, though even he didn't believe it.
As the days stretched on, the hope of returning began to feel like a distant memory. The snowstorm grew relentless, erasing his tracks and swallowing the familiar landmarks he had relied on. His camera, once a source of comfort, now felt like dead weight. When the search parties eventually combed the area, they would find only traces of his journey: a lone backpack, a camera tripod, and boots neatly placed as if by unseen hands. But for Charles, those final moments in the shadow of Crater Lake remain a mystery. Was it the call of the abyss that lured him deeper, or something older, something waiting in the icy silence of the forest? To this day, Crater Lake guards its secrets, keeping the fate of Charles McCuller hidden within its timeless depths. The National Park Service and search teams were already on high alert when he joined the search efforts. Helicopters buzzed overhead while ground crews braved the biting cold, scouring every inch of the snow-covered terrain. The icy wilderness was relentless, each step a grueling battle against nature. The father watched, helpless yet hopeful, as the teams ventured into the unforgiving terrain. He clung to the faint hope that his son might still be alive, perhaps injured and waiting for rescue. For weeks they combed the area meticulously. Snowmobiles roared across frozen creeks and rangers expertly skied down dangerous slopes, leaving no stone unturned. Yet, nothing surfaced. No footprints, no belongings, no sign of Charles. The forest swallowed their efforts, mocking their determination with its silence. Charles McCuller's father arrived in Oregon with an unbearable weight pressing on his chest. The last letter from his son had been filled with excitement. Crater Lake was supposed to be the pinnacle of Charles's photography journey, not a destination steeped in mystery and heartbreak. As days turned to weeks without any word from Charles, dread consumed him. Desperation led Charles's father to reach out to anyone who could help. He contacted the FBI, congressmen, anyone who might offer resources or guidance. But even with their involvement, hope began to dwindle as the winter weeks dragged on. The sheer scale of the search left him grasping at straws, and every passing day felt like a cruel reminder that his son might never return. Then, 20 months later, a glimmer of closure arrived, if it could even be called that. On October 14, 1976, hikers stumbled upon a backpack and car keys near Bybee Creek, miles from where Charles had last been seen. Park staff were quick to investigate, but what they found would only deepen the mystery. Charles's partial remains were discovered in a remote, rugged area, far from any trail. His jeans lay unbuttoned, his coat and shirt missing, and his boots nowhere to be found. The condition of his body defied logic. The jeans were empty, save for the broken ends of his shin bones which protruded upward. His feet, or what remained of them, were still in his socks. Further away, they found his skull and jawbone, oddly positioned over 10 feet from the rest of his remains. For Charles's father, the scene was incomprehensible. How could his son have traveled 13 miles through snow over 7 feet deep? And why were there no footprints to trace his path? The park rangers theorized that Charles may have fallen into a frozen creek and died of exposure. But if that were true, how did his remains end up sitting on a log in such an inaccessible spot? The Oregon State Crime Lab confirmed that Charles had died where his body was found, and there were no signs of foul play. But the unanswered questions haunted his father. Where had Charles's coat and boots gone? What had broken his shin bones and scattered his skull? And most chilling of all, what force could have lured his son into such a perilous and remote location? In the years since, the mystery has lingered, as unsolvable as the enigma of Crater Lake itself. For Charles's father, closure remains elusive. His search for answers continues, not in the snow-covered forests of Oregon, but in the endless corridors of his memory, where every smile, laugh, and photograph of his son serves as both a comfort and a reminder of the tragedy that still defies explanation. Mrs. Cornelius could still feel the bitter chill of the Crater Lake wind on her face as she recounted that fateful day. The lake had always been a place of breathtaking beauty, but standing at its edge, she had felt an inexplicable unease, a weight pressing on her chest, as though the pristine waters hid a darker truth. Her husband Cornelius had seemed enthralled, his eyes fixated on the cobalt expanse of the lake. She had admired the view alongside him, but something in his demeanor began to shift. It was subtle at first, a distant look, as if he were no longer entirely present.
"Cornelius?" she had asked, her voice tinged with worry.
He didn't respond. Instead, he calmly removed his wallet and watch, placing them gently into her trembling hands.
"What are you doing?" Her voice rose as a pang of fear shot through her.
Still, he said nothing. His expression was resolute, almost as if he were under a spell. Before she could stop him, he knelt on the snowy ground, his movements eerily methodical. Then, without hesitation, he launched himself down the steep, icy slope toward the lake below. Her scream echoed through the silence of the forest. She watched in horror as he tumbled, his body sliding uncontrollably until a sickening crack pierced the air. She knew he had broken his leg, yet he kept moving, dragging himself across the snow with a determination that defied all reason.
"Cornelius, stop, please!" she cried, her voice breaking, but it was as if he couldn't hear her, or worse, didn't care.
She scrambled after him, slipping and clawing at the ice in a desperate attempt to reach him, but the terrain was treacherous. All she could do was watch as he reached the lake's edge, his figure a shadow against the shimmering water. Then, to her utter disbelief, he waded into the freezing depths, the icy water swallowing him whole. Mrs. Cornelius stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as the ripples smoothed over and the lake returned to its serene state, as if it had never claimed her husband. She fell to her knees, clutching his wallet, and watched tightly to her chest, tears streaming down her face. The beauty of the lake mocked her grief, its calm surface hiding the sinister force that had compelled Cornelius to his death. In the years since, Mrs. Cornelius had replayed that moment over and over in her mind. The calm determination in her husband's eyes, the way he seemed to be pulled by an invisible force, it all pointed to something beyond human understanding. The Native Americans had warned of the lake's curse, of its malevolent power that could strip even the strongest-willed of their agency. And though Mrs. Cornelius had once dismissed such stories as mere folklore, she now believed them with every fiber of her being. The lake was not just a place of beauty, it was a predator, silent and patient, waiting for its next victim to stare too long into its depths.
While camping on the side of a rock face in Tenaya Canyon, I felt a subtle tug on my sleeping bag. It was something teasing, not overly dramatic. No flashing lights or flying objects, just an undeniable sense of another presence.
Many believe this could be tied to Chief Tenaya's curse, which some say extends beyond Tenaya Canyon to haunt the entirety of Yosemite National Park. Not far from Tenaya Canyon lies the historic Ahwahnee Hotel, a site brimming with ghostly lore.
I lived on the 6th floor until my death in 1970. My spirit is often seen by staff and guests, known for playful acts like tidying rooms, folding clothes, and even tucking guests into bed.
Another notable story from the hotel involves President John F. Kennedy, who stayed there in 1962. Due to back pain, he requested a rocking chair for his room. After his assassination the following year, reports began to surface of an ethereal rocking chair appearing on the 3rd floor, especially in the room where Kennedy stayed, rocking on its own, sometimes with an apparition sitting in it. One of Yosemite's most haunted outdoor locations is Grouse Lake, about 12 miles south of Tenaya Canyon.
In 1857, I reported hearing an unnatural wailing sound near the lake, resembling the cries of a lost puppy. Local Native Americans told me the sound was the spirit of a boy who had drowned there 3 years prior. The boy's spirit was said to detest strangers and would wail at them. If anyone entered the lake, the spirit might grab their legs and drag them underwater. Initially skeptical, I came to believe the tale after repeated experiences.
Galen Clark's encounters have cemented Grouse Lake's reputation as one of Yosemite's most haunted locations. Another chilling location is Bridal Veil Fall, a stunning 617-foot cascade. According to Awani legend, it's home to Pono, a malevolent spirit. Pono is said to lure people to the edge of the cliff using hypnotic rainbows, mysterious voices, or even her own spectral form. Once close enough, an unpredictable gust of wind seals their fate. Over the years, several people have fallen to their deaths, though modern railings now attempt to keep visitors safe. Adding to Yosemite's mystique is the staggering number of missing persons cases. According to David Paulides' book, Missing 411 Western United States and Canada, the park has seen 32 disappearances with mysterious circumstances between 1923 and 2009. An additional 8 strange cases were reported between 1972 and 2021, including one just 8 miles outside the park involving Sandra Hughes, a story so chilling it's hard to ignore. Sandra Hughes, a 54-year-old accountant with striking blue hair and a love for outdoor survival, vanished under mysterious circumstances during the summer of 2020. In late June, she informed her family of her plan to embark on a solo hike in California's Sierra National Forest, aiming to explore Johnson Meadows. By July 2nd, hikers passing through the area stumbled upon a campsite in disarray, food, papers, and belongings strewn everywhere. Finding the scene suspicious, they alerted the Madera County Sheriff's Office, who discovered an ID belonging to Sandra Hughes. Sandra's family, describing her as a meticulous, neat freak, insisted she would never leave her campsite in such a state. A search was initiated on July 5th, but no immediate trace of Sandra was found. Her car, however, was discovered at the bottom of a ditch nearby, heavily damaged from colliding with a tree. Much like her campsite, the car's interior was scattered across the surrounding ground. Searchers left the car in place with a bright red note, hoping Sandra might return and see that her family was searching for her. The next day, her sleeping bag was located 2.5 miles away, near the boundaries of Yosemite National Park. Authorities intensified their efforts, deploying helicopters, search dogs, and volunteers throughout the Sierra National Forest and Yosemite. Flyers with Sandra's picture were distributed, and her distinctive blue hair made her easy to recognize. On July 4th, a hiker reported seeing a woman matching Sandra's description, bruised, wearing a black shirt and jeans, and walking away when he offered help. He later realized it was Sandra upon seeing her missing person poster. Weeks later, on August 9th, 2 hunters encountered a woman who fit Sandra's description in the forest. This time, she was wearing a flowered t-shirt and overalls, standing still and staring into space. Attempts to speak with her were met with silence, and she disappeared without a trace. The change in clothing baffled authorities, as Sandra had not returned to her camp or car. For a year, the case went cold until a chilling incident in July 2021. The Gorba family visiting Shea Peak prepared for a picnic when their 3-year-old son, Caden, pointed out a woman in the meadow. He described her as wearing a black shirt and jeans with blue hair. "She needs our help," he said, "but she's dead. She's lying face down with her legs up. She can't talk to me, but she's there." Alarmed, Caden's father searched the area but found nothing. Disturbed, the family cut their trip short and shared the incident on Facebook. The sheriff's office, seeing the post, escorted the family back to the location, but no trace of Sandra was found. To this day, Sandra Hughes remains missing, her case unresolved, leaving behind eerie sightings and haunting questions. Her disappearance adds to the strange, almost supernatural lore surrounding Yosemite and the Sierra National Forest. The rumors had been swirling for weeks, a whisper here, a worried glance there. Abigail had tried to stay calm, for her children's sake, but the tension was unmistakable. The British were coming, and they would not spare coastal settlements like theirs. She had spent the last night folding what little they could carry into bundles while Jonathan and Obadiah gathered tools and supplies. Each item she packed felt like a small betrayal of the home they were leaving behind. That morning, as the wagons were loaded with their lives' remnants, Abigail wrapped her children tightly in blankets, their small faces pressed to her sides. The youngest clung to her skirt, his wide eyes asking questions she had no answers for. She glanced at the modest house they had worked so hard to build, now left behind to an uncertain fate. The forest was dense as they traveled inland, the wagon wheels creaking over rough terrain. The children were restless, but she managed to keep them entertained with stories, even as her heart ached with each mile. They moved northwest, leaving behind the salty air of Rhode Island for the wooded stillness of Connecticut. Days later, they arrived in the town of PMR, nestled safely away from the coast but still connected to the bustling trade routes. Abigail felt a small glimmer of relief. Perhaps this place could be a haven. Jonathan and Obadiah wasted no time scouting the area for land. The men talked of streams, timber, and soil, but Abigail's thoughts were on more practical concerns, how they would make a home out of this wilderness. When they found a parcel of land a few miles from town, the men were filled with optimism. The stream would power their tools, they said, and the timber would build sturdy homes. Abigail saw only the vastness of the work ahead. Still, she helped as best she could, her hands raw from labor but steady in their purpose. The men called their settlement Barak, a name they said symbolized hope. Abigail said little, her mind too consumed with the reality of survival. Hope was a luxury she couldn't afford yet. Not until she saw her children safe and well-fed, their laughter returning to fill the air of this new place. But as she looked at the others, working tirelessly beside her, she felt the stirrings of something close to hope. Perhaps they could make Barak more than a name. Perhaps it could truly become a sanctuary. Thomas wiped the sweat from his brow as the last light of the day faded into the shadows of the forest. The steady churn of the water wheel was a familiar sound, a rhythm that marked the end of his long day at the mill. The linen wheels, freshly crafted and ready for trade, were stacked neatly in the corner. He lingered for a moment, inspecting his work, proud of the care he put into every task despite the circumstances of his life. As he turned to leave, a flicker of movement caught his eye, a small figure darting between the spinning wheels. He froze. At first he thought it might be one of the village children sneaking into the mill for mischief. He called out, his voice low but firm. "Who's there?" No answer. The shadows remained still. Mustering his courage, Thomas walked toward the spot where he'd seen the movement, his heartbeat quickening. But when he reached it, there was nothing, just the faint creak of the wooden floorboards and the cool draft of the evening air. The next morning he told Sarah, a field hand he often confided in, about the strange sight. She nodded gravely, her face unreadable. "I've seen things too," she whispered. "Shadows in the corn, moving when there's no wind to stir them." Their hushed conversation spread among the quarters, and soon others began sharing their own eerie tales. Some had seen small, gremlin-like creatures darting through the village at night, while others swore they heard the cries of an infant near the cemetery, a chilling sound given that no babies lived in Barak. The founding families, busy with their business and the growth of the village, dismissed these stories. Thomas had learned long ago not to expect them to listen to the concerns of those like him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the land itself was uneasy, as if it resented their presence. As the years passed, Thomas watched the fortunes of Barak slowly unravel. After Jonathan and Obadiah passed, their children struggled to keep the mill running. The equipment began breaking down, the fields grew wild, and the settlers' confidence waned. Thomas noticed fewer wagons coming to trade at the mill, and more families packing up to leave.
By the time Thomas was an old man, the once thriving village was a ghost of its former self. The water wheel, which had been the heartbeat of Barak, stood rusted and silent. The fields that once produced bountiful crops were now choked with weeds and young trees. And those strange figures, those fleeting shadowy forms, were still there, their presence more pronounced in the silence of abandonment. When the last family left, Thomas stood at the edge of the village and looked back one final time. The smoke that once rose from chimneys was gone, replaced by the eerie stillness of the forest reclaiming what had been taken. He didn't know if the land would ever rest, but as he walked away, he carried with him the memories of a place haunted by more than just the passage of time. I arrived at Barak with my team in August of 1971, eager but apprehensive. The accounts I'd read about this place were unsettling. Shadowy figures, phantom sounds, and a sense of something lingering in the ruins of this once thriving village. Yet I wasn't one to be swayed by rumors. I wanted evidence, something tangible to explain why Barak had captured the imaginations and fears of so many. The first thing I noticed as we approached was the silence. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a secluded forest. No, this was unnatural. oppressive. Not a single bird chirped, no insects buzzed, no rustling in the underbrush. It was as though the land itself was holding its breath. We didn't want to linger any longer than necessary, so we began our work immediately, mapping the layout of the ruins and photographing the crumbling foundations. As we moved through the overgrown paths, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Then it started. One of the team members, a keen listener, stopped abruptly and motioned for us to be silent. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. We strained our ears and faintly heard it too. Laughter. High-pitched, innocent and playful, like children near the brook. But when we investigated, there was no one there. Moments later, other sounds followed, a dog barking, the low moo of cows, all coming from the empty fields where no animals had lived for decades. The air seemed charged, as if the place was alive in ways we couldn't comprehend. It was when one of my team members suddenly froze in place that I began to question the wisdom of coming here. He stood rigid, his face pale, and whispered hoarsely, "I can't move my legs." We tried to help him, but it was as if he were rooted to the ground. After several tense minutes, he was finally able to move, but the fear in his eyes was enough for all of us to call it a day. We left Barak that evening, rattled and uneasy. None of us spoke much on the drive back. 2 months later, in October, we returned for another attempt, determined to see the investigation through. But the moment we arrived, a wave of inexplicable despair washed over us. It wasn't tied to any specific memory or thought, just a heavy, pervasive sadness that settled into our bones. We couldn't shake it. Every step we took felt like a struggle against an unseen force. The energy around us was oppressive, draining, and none of us wanted to stay longer than necessary. By the time we left, our spirits were broken. To this day, Barak remains one of the most unsettling places I've ever encountered. The evidence we gathered, photographs, recordings, and measurements, offered little explanation for what we experienced. But I know what I felt. There is something in that village, something that defies understanding, and it lingers still in the ruins and shadows. We bought the property several years ago, drawn by its seclusion and rich history. We knew it was once the village of Barak, a place long abandoned and shrouded in eerie tales, but we didn't expect the stories to come alive. At first, it was small things, sounds in the distance, faint and almost too quiet to notice. I'd be working in the garden and hear what seemed like singing, women's voices harmonizing in an old tune I couldn't place. My partner would often stop mid-task, listening. "Did you hear that?" he'd ask, and I'd nod, even though I wished I could say no. Then there were the nights. The nights are the hardest to explain. Long after the sun sets, the sounds of the past seem to creep in. A rooster crowing at odd hours, phantom wagon wheels creaking along paths that have been overgrown for decades, and the faint clinking of glasses and scraping of chairs as if some ghostly dinner party was still underway. I once stood at the edge of the old mill's foundation, listening to what sounded like a full day compressed into minutes. The bustle of a mill at work, voices calling out orders, the rhythm of life in a place that hasn't existed for over a century. It left me cold in more ways than one. Speaking of cold, there are spots on the property where the air turns icy without warning, even on the warmest summer days. The old slave quarters are the worst. We've measured drops of up to 30 degrees there, and it's not just the temperature. There's a weight to the air, like stepping into a space where sorrow itself has taken root. Sometimes whispers accompany the cold. They're faint, foreign, and just out of reach, like a language I should understand, but don't.
We've put up no trespassing signs to keep people away, but even that hasn't stopped the curious. Paranormal investigators, ghost hunters, and thrill seekers all want a piece of Barak's mysteries. We've had to turn away more than a few. Still, I can't blame them for their fascination. Even living here, I don't fully understand what's happening. Theories abound. Some say the land is cursed, a consequence of the displacement of the native Nitem people who lived here before the settlers. Others talk about portals to parallel dimensions and time slips. I don't know what to believe, but I do know this. Barak isn't just a place, it's alive, in its own strange, unsettling way. Even now, as I write this, the familiar sounds drift through the evening air, laughter, faint and fleeting, and the steady murmur of voices that never quite fade. Whatever Barak is, it's a story that refuses to end. In the Sierra Nevada mountains, where history is steeped in tales of hardship and mystery, the story of Christine Skubish and her son Nick resonates deeply. Christine's tragic death, Nick's incredible survival, and the uncanny premonitions surrounding their ordeal make this account one of haunting wonder. Christine's car accident alone is a harrowing tale, driver fatigue and treacherous mountain roads leading to a devastating crash. But what followed elevates this story into the realm of the extraordinary. For 5 days, 3-year-old Nick survived, defying all odds. His account of a glowing orb with a woman's silhouette guiding him up and down the mountain is a striking detail, suggesting a protective force or presence. Equally astonishing is Deborah Hoy's vivid dream and compulsion to drive to the crash site. Her experience adds another layer of intrigue, as if Christine's spirit reached out from beyond, ensuring her son's survival. Deputy Rich Strauzer's persistence in revisiting the scene and his discovery of Nick just in time further underscores the sense of intervention. Adding to the mystique, Nick's grandmother experienced recurring dreams of Christine calling out for help, as though a maternal bond persisted even beyond death. These interconnected experiences, dreams, visions, and miraculous survival, challenge our understanding of coincidence and fate. While the official explanation may attribute the crash to driver fatigue, the miraculous convergence of events that led to Nick's rescue defies simple rationalization. Whether viewed as a miracle, an example of spiritual intervention, or a case of residual energy tied to the tragic history of the Sierra Nevada, this story leaves an indelible impression. In the end, Christine's love for her son seemed to transcend physical boundaries, compelling strangers and loved ones alike to act. It's a reminder of the mysteries that surround life, death, and the unseen forces that may connect us all. The woods before, nor could he adequately describe it. It was an eerie, mechanical sound, almost like the hum of an engine or a distant turbine, but it didn't belong in the serene wilderness of the Adirondacks. This strange auditory anomaly has left many theorizing about its origin. The setup of the disappearance. Tom Messick's hunting party was divided into 2 groups. His role, given his advanced age and limited mobility due to an eye injury and a bad knee, was simple. Stay stationed at a spot near Lily Pond and wait for deer to be driven toward him. The others would fan out, walking through the woods to push any game in his direction. When the appointed time came to regroup, Tom wasn't at his post. His friends and family began calling his name, firing their guns into the air, a distress signal common among hunters, but there was no response. What's even more baffling is that Tom was experienced and would have known the woods well, so the likelihood of him wandering off or getting lost was slim. The search. Within hours, a massive search effort was launched. Local authorities, professional search and rescue teams, and volunteers combed through the area. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging, K9 units, and ground crews meticulously covered the forest. Despite the intensive search that spanned weeks, not a single clue about Tom's whereabouts was uncovered. No clothing, no gear, no sign of his firearm, and not even a hint of disturbed foliage or ground. Theories and mysteries. This case attracted the attention of David Paulides, a former police investigator and author of the Missing 411 series, who specializes in unexplained disappearances in national parks and wilderness areas. Several aspects of Tom's disappearance align with the strange patterns Paulides has documented. Lack of evidence. No physical evidence was found to suggest where Tom went. Unusual sounds. The mechanical noise reported by Tom's best friend has baffled experts. Could it have been related to his disappearance? Experienced outdoorsman, Tom's extensive knowledge of the woods makes the idea of him getting lost or being caught off guard highly unlikely. Vanishing without a trace. No signs of predation, struggle, or even a misplaced item were discovered. Speculations. Many theories have emerged regarding Tom's disappearance, wildlife or accident. Some suggest he could have fallen or been attacked by an animal, but this doesn't explain the complete lack of physical evidence. Human abduction. The idea that Tom was taken by another person has been floated, But again, no tracks or signs of struggle were found. Paranormal phenomena. The mechanical sound and sudden disappearance have led some to propose theories involving UFOs, interdimensional portals, or otherworldly entities. Natural causes. It's possible Tom succumbed to a sudden medical issue and his body was somehow overlooked, though this seems unlikely given the exhaustive search. Tom Messick's case remains unsolved to this day. His family continues to search for answers, clinging to the hope that someday the mystery of his disappearance will be resolved. The haunting nature of his story serves as a stark reminder of how even seasoned outdoorsmen can vanish into thin air, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions. On November 15, 2015, 82-year-old Tom Messick, a seasoned hunter and Army veteran, disappeared during a routine hunting trip near Brant Lake, New York. Accompanied by his son, friends, and fellow hunters, Tom set out with a clear plan in mind. His role was to remain stationary while others drove deer toward him. When the group regrouped at the agreed-upon time, Tom was nowhere to be found. Search efforts began immediately, involving an extraordinary number of search and rescue personnel. Teams systematically combed through every inch of the forest surrounding Lily Pond, yet no trace of Tom was ever found. Not a footprint, a piece of clothing, or even his rifle. He seemed to have vanished without a trace. Adding to the mystery, Tom's best friend, hunting nearby, reported hearing an unusual sound he struggled to describe. He likened it to a metallic snap, similar to the sound of a giant steel trap slamming shut. It was a noise unlike anything he had ever encountered in the woods, neither natural nor mechanical, but profoundly out of place. This chilling detail, coupled with the lack of evidence, sparked countless theories. Some speculated that Tom might have fallen victim to a sophisticated trap hidden in the wilderness. Others suggested more outlandish possibilities, including abduction by a cryptid like Bigfoot or even extraterrestrial involvement. Tom's case shares eerie similarities with other disappearances documented in the Missing 411 series by David Paulides. These cases often involve sudden vanishings, unexplained sounds, and odd phenomena like neatly folded clothing or victims being found miles from where they disappeared. Some theorists believe these patterns point to paranormal or extraterrestrial phenomena, while others suggest the existence of portals or dimensional rifts in remote wilderness areas. Despite extensive searches and investigations, no conclusive answers have emerged. Tom Messick's disappearance remains a chilling mystery, leaving behind unsettling questions. What caused the metallic sound? How could an experienced outdoorsman vanish without a trace? Was there something in the woods that day beyond human understanding? To this day, Tom's family and friends continue to seek closure, while his story serves as a haunting reminder of how vast and enigmatic the wilderness can be. Tom Messick's case takes a darker turn when we consider other strange details and the lingering mysteries surrounding his disappearance. As a seasoned hunter, Tom was familiar with the woods and prepared for emergencies. He always carried candy bars with him, yet searchers found no trace, not even the smallest wrapper. How could someone so experienced simply vanish in such a short span of time, leaving behind no evidence whatsoever? One of the most unsettling elements of this case is the eerie metallic snap heard by Tom's friend nearby. Was it some kind of trap hidden beneath the forest floor, snapping shut as Tom unknowingly stepped on it? Did the sound signify his tragic end? While these questions remain unanswered, it's hard to dismiss the idea that the sound was connected to his disappearance. Speculation runs wild. Could it have been a natural accident, or was it something far more sinister? Some suggest cryptids, supernatural phenomena, or even extraterrestrial involvement. David Paulides, known for his Missing 411 series, highlights how Tom's disappearance fits a disturbing pattern of baffling vanishings in remote areas. Cases marked by strange sounds, mysterious circumstances, and the involvement of law enforcement agencies like the FBI. The FBI's presence in Tom's case raises even more questions. Typically, the FBI does not involve itself in local missing person investigations, especially those in wilderness settings. Yet they made their presence known during the search for Tom, observing but not interfering. Why? What about Tom Messick's disappearance warranted their attention? Paulides also points out the troubling lack of official records for many missing persons in national parks. Park rangers often claim not to track such cases, which seems implausible given the sheer number of mysterious disappearances reported. Stories abound of inexplicable events, children disappearing and later found miles away in impossible locations, sightings of strange creatures and unexplainable occurrences that defy logic. One particularly heartbreaking detail comes from the documentary Missing 411, The Hunted, where Tom's wife, Beverly, recounts how their dog sits by the window every day, waiting for him to return. The image of the dog staring out day after day is a haunting testament to the void left by Tom's disappearance, a mystery that continues to baffle investigators, family, and anyone who ventures into the woods. Tom's story is one of many, a chilling reminder that there are forces and phenomena we do not understand. For those who hunt or explore remote wilderness areas, this case serves as a warning to stay vigilant. The woods hold secrets, some we may never uncover.
As he made his way toward the exit, I decided to step in. Call it curiosity or just the feeling that something wasn't adding up. But I pulled him aside and said, "Hey, yeah, we aired that piece you're asking about."
Doug's face lit up, like he'd finally found someone who was going to tell him the truth.
"The one about the pyramid?" he asked.
I nodded. Yeah, but right after it aired, things got weird. 2 guys showed up, government types if you ask me. They demanded all the tapes, every copy we had of the broadcast. After that, it was like it never happened. Doug pressed for more details, but that was all I had to give him. Whoever those men were, they'd made sure no trace of the segment was left behind. I could see the frustration in Doug's eyes as he realized he'd hit another dead end. As he walked out the door, I couldn't help but wonder about that pyramid and why it had disappeared from the airwaves. Whatever the truth was, it seemed like someone didn't want us, or Doug, getting too close to it. It wasn't every day that you got a call like this. My buddy, a fellow retired military pilot, rang me up with an offer. "I've got a supply run to make. Nothing crazy, just a quick in-and-out trip up in Alaska. We'll be there and back in 3 to 4 hours tops. Trust me, this run will get your heart pumping. You'll feel like a kid again." I was intrigued. I'd heard stories about the Alaska Triangle, missing planes, UFO sightings, and all kinds of eerie things, but I wasn't one to get spooked easily. Besides, I could use a bit of excitement, so I said yes. We took off in his helicopter, and everything felt routine at first. The scenery was breathtaking, but as we got about 5 miles from the drop point, he turned to me and said, "Don't panic, but things are about to get a little crazy." Before I could ask what he meant, the instruments started going haywire. The altimeter, the compass, everything was useless. My buddy stayed calm though, landing the helicopter using nothing but his instincts and experience. When we touched down, I got my first look at the place. It was like something out of a spy movie. Razor wire everywhere, heavily armed guards dressed in black, and not a single insignia on their uniforms. Whatever this place was, it wasn't on any map. We offloaded the cargo while the rotors were still spinning, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't supposed to be there. Or maybe, that I wasn't supposed to see any of this. The guards watched us like hawks, their fingers hovering over their triggers. As soon as the refueling was done, we took off, flying out the same way we came in. No instruments, just sheer skill. About 5 miles out, everything returned to normal, like nothing had ever happened. I didn't ask many questions on the way back, and my buddy didn't volunteer any answers. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. What kind of place was that? And what could be so secretive, so important, that they'd go to such lengths to keep it hidden? Years later, when my son Bruce heard Linda Moulton Howe on the radio, he put 2 and 2 together. He urged me to tell my story, and now it's out there for the world to piece together. As for me, I'm just glad I made it out of that triangle alive. When the orders came, I didn't ask questions. That was the way of things. I'd been in the Navy long enough working on top-secret projects to know that curiosity wasn't always rewarded. Still, being flown from Nebraska to Alaska piqued my interest. Whatever this was, it had to be big. The trip was uneventful until I arrived in Alaska and was loaded onto a nondescript bus with blacked-out windows. For 6 hours, we drove through what I assumed were rugged landscapes, though I couldn't see a thing. Finally, we arrived at a military facility. From there, I was taken underground, descending several floors in an elevator. When the doors opened, I found myself in front of a massive, thick steam door. It groaned open, and what I saw beyond it stopped me in my tracks. A pyramid. A massive, dark stone pyramid unlike anything I'd ever seen, standing 550 feet tall. Its tip was buried just 150 feet below the Alaskan wilderness. It felt ancient, as though it had been there for millennia, built by hands, or something, not of our time. My work there was technical, and, as always, I wasn't told much. My job was to assess and work on the energy systems, and I quickly realized that this was no ordinary structure. The energy it generated was unlike anything I'd encountered, powerful enough to theoretically light up a country as large as Canada. When my time at the facility ended, I returned to Nebraska, but the pyramid stayed with me, in my thoughts, in my dreams. It inspired me to recreate a smaller version of it, crafted from aluminum. To my amazement, the replica worked, generating enough power to sustain my entire farm. I never told anyone outside my family about the connection, though. You don't work on projects like that without knowing the consequences of loose talk. Years later, I'd hear whispers about others who knew of the pyramid. Pilots who'd seen strange disruptions in their instruments, people who'd gone missing searching for it, and even that news report tied to the Chinese nuclear test. I wasn't surprised, but I kept my distance.
The world wasn't ready for what was beneath Alaska, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted to know all the answers. Some mysteries are better left buried. When Nathan Campbell hired me to fly him to Carey Lake, I didn't think much of it at first. Alaska gets its fair share of loners and adventurers, people looking to get lost in the wilderness for a while. But as we flew north, I noticed how quiet he was, barely saying a word until halfway through the trip. That's when he finally opened up a bit.
I'm heading to Carey Lake to search for the Dark Pyramid.
He said it as matter of fact, as if he'd told me he was going fishing. I glanced over at him, trying to gauge if he was serious. The Dark Pyramid? I'd heard the rumors, sure. Stories about some ancient underground structure with unimaginable power. But most people dismissed it as conspiracy nonsense. Nathan, though, seemed dead serious. Carey Lake, as remote as it is, made more sense when he mentioned the pyramid. It's one of the closest spots to the coordinates people have whispered about. Still, the area is nothing but dense alderbrush and wild, overgrown trees, a nightmare to navigate on foot. If something were hidden out there, it could easily stay hidden for centuries. When we landed, I helped him unload his gear. The guy looked prepared. He had everything he'd need for 4 months off the grid. I asked him, "You sure you're good out here?"
Yep, I got this.
He even mentioned a satellite phone to keep in touch with his family and told me to come back for him on September 15th. As I flew away, I couldn't shake a nagging feeling. Something about the whole situation didn't sit right with me. But people come to Alaska for all kinds of reasons, and it wasn't my place to question his. Fast forward to mid-September, I returned to Carey Lake as planned to pick him up. But Nathan was nowhere to be found. I circled the area a couple of times, hoping to spot him waving from the shore. Nothing. That's when I contacted the National Park Service. When they started the search, they found his campsite, but it looked abandoned, as if no one had been there for months. They also found his journal, just mundane entries about his daily routine. The last entry was dated late June. Went to get water, that was it. No other trace of Nathan was ever found. It's like he just vanished into thin air. I can't help but wonder, did he find what he was looking for? Or did the wilderness claim him like it has so many others? Maybe he got too close to something he shouldn't have, something the government wouldn't want anyone knowing about. After all, if there's any truth to the stories about that pyramid, it'd be one of the most strategically significant discoveries in history. Either way, I'll never forget that flight, or the man who disappeared chasing a legend. The mission was simple: observe, record, and ensure no harm to the subjects. Our destination was a quiet stretch of earth in what the locals called New Hampshire. We chose a target, a small, self-contained vehicle traveling along an empty road. Inside were 2 Earth inhabitants, engaged in their routine nighttime activities. We hovered at a distance initially, blending with the points of light in the sky. The female occupant, designated as Subject 1, was the first to notice our presence. Her gaze lingered upward, curiosity sparking as she observed our subtle movements. It wasn't long before she alerted her companion, Subject 2.
Subject 2 exited their primitive transport device and retrieved an optical enhancement tool. His observations confirmed that we were no longer an indistinct light in the sky, but an object of structured design. Through their primitive technology, they discerned the glow of our observation windows.
Our descent was deliberate. We needed a closer vantage point to monitor their responses. Their actions were fascinating, fear mixed with determination as they attempted to evade us. Subject 2 accelerated their transport device, but we mirrored their maneuvers with precision, maintaining an even distance. Every turn they made, we matched. As they sought an alternate path, our craft adjusted, descending further until the glow of our observation lights reflected on their vehicle's surface. This proximity was necessary to complete our study. Their reactions, erratic movement, heightened emotional states, and verbal communication were meticulously recorded. Then, unexpectedly, Subject 2 brought their transport to a halt in the middle of the road. This was not within the anticipated parameters. We held our position, awaiting their next move. Our mission protocols dictated non-interference beyond observation. Yet, the unfolding scenario hinted at an anomaly in their behavior, a potential moment of significance in their understanding of the unknown. The study was progressing. The subjects were reacting as expected, their heightened fear and curiosity fueling their actions. For us, it was another successful data collection operation. For them, it was a night they would never forget. Our mission was progressing as expected. The subjects, a pair of Earth inhabitants traveling through a remote area, were ideal candidates for study. Their routine, their isolation, their unaware yet curious nature, it all aligned perfectly with our parameters.
When the male subject exited his transport device and raised a primitive optical tool to observe us, we noted the curiosity and unease radiating from him.
Through our observation windows, we watched his reactions and those of his companion, the female subject still inside their vehicle. It was a fascinating display of their emotional spectrum, fear, curiosity, and determination.
I don't know what happened. One moment we were driving and then everything went blank.
I felt this overwhelming sense of fear, like we were being watched. It was so intense.
The encounter left both subjects in a state of confusion and heightened emotional distress. They struggled to piece together the fragmented memories of the event. The male lingered, his gaze fixed on us, and then it happened, the activation sequence. This part of the mission always created anomalies in the subject's behavior, as their conscious state was temporarily overridden. We ensured their safety during the transition, as it was imperative that no harm come to them during their time aboard our craft. Inside, the subjects were subjected to our standard protocols, non-invasive scans, tissue sampling, and neural mapping. The male was particularly resistant at first, his stress levels heightened, but the calming fields adjusted accordingly. The female exhibited vivid emotional responses, particularly in moments of recall projection, a process that allows us to view and document their memories and experiences. The male's footwear became scuffed during locomotion testing. The female's fabric coverings were torn slightly during a vibrational calibration sequence. These physical anomalies would later serve as markers of the event, though their immediate significance to the subjects was unclear. As their observational time concluded, we ensured their return to their vehicle, repositioned further along the path of their journey. Time distortion fields accounted for the 2-hour gap in their memory. Before reintegration, we introduced subtle implants, tiny markers for long-term observational studies. When the subjects regained consciousness in their vehicle, disorientation was expected. The residual effects of our equipment caused fluctuations in their directional tool, a magnetic device they referred to as a compass. This would likely be a source of confusion for them, but it posed no harm. The return to their dwelling marked the end of our immediate interaction. Yet their responses to the experience continued to intrigue us. The female's subconscious attempts to process the event through vivid nocturnal images, the male's physical discomfort and introspection, and their shared difficulty reconciling the missing time. Our observations were complete, but the subjects would carry this encounter with them for the rest of their lives. Their reactions, their attempts to uncover the truth, and their eventual retelling of the event would ripple far beyond this single night, a testament to the profound impact of a fleeting connection between two worlds. Barney, who had never experienced anxiety before, began having panic attacks at work. He struggled to focus on his job at the post office, his hands often trembling uncontrollably, and the persistent pain in his neck showed no signs of subsiding. Meanwhile, the couple noticed other peculiar changes. When Betty tried to hang up the dress she had worn that night, she discovered odd circular stains on it. Despite multiple attempts to wash them out, the stains remained, effectively ruining the dress. Driving at night became unbearable for both of them. The sight of headlights in the rearview mirror would send them into a panic. To cope, they started taking alternate routes to avoid the stretch of highway near the White Mountains where their experience occurred. After enduring about 10 days of this mounting distress, Betty decided to confide in her sister, explaining everything that had happened. Her sister suggested reporting the incident to Pease Air Force Base. When Betty called the base, she was connected to Major Paul Henderson. He listened to their story and filed an official report. However, his conclusion dismissed the event as a likely misidentification of Jupiter or another bright planet. This explanation baffled Betty and Barney. They were certain that what they had encountered was no planet. Planets don't follow cars down mountain roads. They tried to move on, but their nightmares and anxiety only intensified. Betty struggled to sleep, and Barney's neck pain grew so severe that he could barely turn his head. A concerned friend eventually recommended they see Dr. Benjamin Simon, a Boston psychiatrist who specialized in trauma therapy through hypnosis. Dr. Simon suggested that their subconscious minds had buried the memories of what had happened, causing their psychological and physical symptoms. He decided to hypnotize Betty and Barney separately to avoid any influence one might have on the other's recollections. During these sessions, both Betty and Barney revealed extraordinary details. They described being stopped on the road by a group of beings about 5 feet tall, with large heads, grey skin, and enormous wraparound eyes. The beings had small, unmoving mouths and communicated telepathically, transmitting thoughts directly into the couple's minds. Barney recounted feeling terrified as the beings approached their car. He described being compelled, against his will, to exit the vehicle and walk into the woods, where they were taken aboard a craft. He vividly recalled being laid on a table for an examination that included skin sampling and other painful tests. The beings were particularly fascinated by his dentures, something they appeared to have never encountered before. Betty's sessions aligned closely with Barney's. She described being in a brightly lit room with curved walls where similar beings examined her. They performed what they referred to as a pregnancy test by inserting a long needle into her navel. One especially strange detail from her account involved a star map that one of the beings showed her. When asked if she recognized it, Betty responded that she did not. After her session, she reproduced the map from memory. Throughout these hypnosis sessions, both Betty and Barney displayed intense emotional responses, often crying or shaking as they relived their experiences. Dr. Simon noted the sincerity of their reactions. Despite his skepticism of UFOs or extraterrestrial encounters, he was struck by how consistent their accounts were, even though the sessions were conducted separately. One detail that fascinated researchers was Betty's star map. In 1968, amateur astronomer Marjorie Fish attempted to match the map to known star systems. After painstakingly creating models, she found a striking correlation with the Zeta Reticuli star system, an arrangement not properly mapped until years after Betty's hypnosis sessions.
The Hill case attracted considerable attention, along with its share of skepticism. Critics suggested that elements of their story mirrored scenes from the television movie Invaders from Mars, which had aired shortly before their encounter. Others theorized that societal stress, particularly as an interracial couple in the 1960s, could have triggered shared delusions. Still, the couple's accounts and the evidence they provided left an enduring mystery that continues to captivate and divide audiences. The road directly toward the creature. The Pennsylvania Dogman froze for a moment, its glowing eyes locked with mine through the windshield. It was massive, easily the size of a bear, with the posture of a wolf standing upright and fur that seemed to bristle with an almost otherworldly energy. Time felt like it slowed, but in reality, it was only a few seconds before I heard my wife Whitney scream.
What was that?
The camper skidded uncontrollably, and I braced myself for the inevitable collision. But just before we struck the creature, it leapt out of the way with an agility that seemed impossible for something so large. We came to a stop on the shoulder, shaken but unharmed. For a moment, the only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and the soft patter of snowflakes on the windshield. The kids started crying in the back, and Whitney was pale, clutching her seatbelt.
What was that?
I couldn't answer her. My heart was pounding and my hands were trembling on the wheel. I looked out the side window, scanning the woods for any sign of the creature. For a moment, I thought it was gone, but then I saw it. The dogman was standing just inside the tree line, its glowing eyes fixed on us. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there watching.
Is it still there?
Stay in the camper, lock the doors.
You're not going out there, are you?
I have to see if it's still following us. I stepped out of the camper into the freezing air. The snow muffled every sound and the woods felt eerily silent. The dogman tilted its head slightly as if curious, and then turned and disappeared into the shadows of the forest without a sound. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. The rational part of my mind wanted to dismiss the whole thing as a hallucination or a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew what I had seen was real. I climbed back into the camper, my mind racing. We need to keep moving. I don't think it's coming back, but I don't want to stay here. We drove in tense silence for the next hour until we reached the campground. I didn't sleep much that night. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves outside the camper made my heart race. The kids thankfully slept soundly, blissfully unaware of the danger we might have been in. The rest of our trip passed without incident, but I never stopped thinking about that night on Route 271. The Pennsylvania Dogman became a story we would tell in hushed tones around the campfire, a reminder of the wild and untamed forces that still exist in the world. And though I'll never fully understand what we saw that night, it reinforced one thing I've always believed. Sometimes the unknown is closer than we think. The highway was not my friend that night. The camper swayed back and forth like a drunk trying to walk a straight line, and I was doing my best to keep us upright. Every tilt to the left or the right had me imagining us flipping over in slow motion, Hollywood style. If that happened, it would be game over for us. Then, because my night wasn't bad enough, a creature decided to step onto the road on my left. Perfect. Just what I needed. Roadkill with a side of nightmare fuel. I swerved to the right thinking, hey, no big deal, I'll just take a little scenic detour off the road. But no. Of course, another wolfman, because one wasn't enough, wandered out right in front of us. At that point, I realized I was going to hit something. A monster, a tree, or my breaking point, it was anyone's guess. So I cranked the wheel further to the right, aiming for the trees and hoping they'd be kind enough to stop our fall without obliterating the camper or, us. Somehow I succeeded. Kind of. The vehicle tilted to a solid 25 degrees, leaning on a couple of large trees that were groaning like an old man getting out of bed. Inside the camper, chaos erupted. My wife screamed, the kids burst into a symphony of crying, and I just sat there gripping the wheel like it was a lifeline. My hands were shaking. My brain had hit the blue screen of death, and every survival skill I thought I had was apparently out of order. Then, I saw him. One of the wolfmen swaggered toward us, not walked, swaggered. He had the kind of confidence that said, yeah, I'm scary, but I don't even have to try. Weirdly, that calmed me down for a second. But only for a second, because then he lunged at my window. S1. Media group. Wolfman swaggering towards camper at night. Wolfman lunging at camper window at its stock at it distribute _ I screamed like a man who'd just seen his tax bill and slid to the right, which caused the camper to tilt even more. Now we were at a solid 30 degrees, and gravity was clearly taking bets on how long we'd last. Looking outside, I realized we had a crowd now. Not 2, but 3 dogmen were hanging around like it was some kind of supernatural team-building exercise. They seemed to be communicating, probably planning something like, hey, let's see if we can push these humans down the hill. I could hear one of them moving near the trees, and I couldn't help but think, are they trying to knock the trees over? Are they helping? Or are they just really bad at staying in their lane? At this point, I wasn't sure if we were in mortal danger or the weirdest episode of Animal Planet ever. We were tipping over. The camper creaked and groaned like it had taken up a career in sound effects, with branches snapping and even tree trunks cracking beneath us. Naturally, we all screamed like contestants on a horror-themed game show. My wife peeked out the window and shouted, "They're pushing us! All the hairy monster men are working together!" I couldn't believe it. These dogmen were treating us like a giant overturned turtle, shoving us back and forth, left, right, left again, until suddenly bam, all four wheels hit the ground. My foot instinctively slammed on the gas, and the camper lurched back onto flat terrain, the front end sticking awkwardly into the road like we just parallel parked in a demolition derby. The kids erupted into cheers, my wife openly wept, and I just sat there trying not to hyperventilate. It hit me. What if they saved us just to eat us? Was this some kind of cryptid farm-to-table situation? I was too overwhelmed to drive. As I sat there gasping for air, I saw the swaggering alpha dog man making his way over to me again. This time, though, he wasn't strutting like an action hero. He had this oddly familiar look on his face, one that tugged at my memory. Then it hit me. That was the same look my old dog Morley used to give me, right before he'd beg for an ear scratch. But Morley was a husky Malamute mix, and last I checked, those breeds can't walk upright like a movie villain. The alpha wolfman leaned in close and to my complete shock licked my face. My wife shrieked, "He's got a taste for human flesh now, we have to stop him before he eats the whole state." Meanwhile, I was trying to process what was happening. The dog man tilted his head to the side just like Morley used to do when he wanted a good ear scratch. Without thinking, I reached out to scratch him, and immediately, the other dogmen outside started growling like bouncers at a nightclub. Undeterred, I gave him a scratch, and he leaned in so hard, I thought he was going to dislocate my shoulder. The other dogmen stopped growling, but looked visibly uncomfortable, like coworkers watching their boss hug someone a little too long at the office Christmas party. Once I hit all the alpha's itchy spots, he flopped onto the ground and gave himself a quick once-over, just like Morley used to do. Satisfied, he stood up, dropped to all fours, and bolted into the woods, the other dogmen yipping and howling as they followed. The last I saw of him, he paused, turned back, and gave me this almost human-like nod before disappearing into the trees. And just like that, they were gone. To this day, that encounter changed our lives in ways we're still figuring out. For my wife, it's all trauma and horror. She's basically living her own private monster movie. But for me and the kids, it was a mind-blowing, eye-opening experience. Now the kids are obsessed with dogmen and cryptid stories. Honestly, they're getting so into it that I wouldn't be surprised if they're hosting their own podcast in a few years. As for me, I can't shake the feeling that it was somehow Morley who came back to save us. Was it really him, reincarnated as a monster with swagger? I can't say for sure, but in my heart, I like to think it was. So, what do you think of that wild experience? I hope you enjoyed this retelling. Let's dive into one of the most mysterious stories ever told. And yes, if you're thinking about the Dyatlov Pass incident, ding ding ding, you're right. But don't click away yet. This one has twists, turns, and enough eerie vibes to make a horror movie jealous. First, let's recap for the uninitiated. Back in 1959, 9 students from the Ural Polytechnic Institute decided to take on Russia's Mount Ortorton, aka Dead Mountain. Pro tip, if a mountain has dead in its nickname, maybe pick a different vacation spot. Leading this ill-fated expedition was Igor Dyatlov, a guy so hardcore he probably ate snow for breakfast. Things started out great. Well, as great as trudging through freezing snow could be. The group pitched their tent on February 1st after an 11-mile trek, but by morning things had gone so far south that they ended up north, as in the afterlife. Search teams found their tent torn apart like it had gone a few rounds with a grizzly, and lost. Even stranger, footprints led away from the tent, indicating the group had fled half-dressed into sub-zero temperatures. Not exactly a great survival strategy.
The grim discoveries didn't end there. The grim discoveries didn't end there. Autopsies revealed bizarre injuries, massive internal trauma, skull fractures and chest compressions you'd expect from being tackled by a sumo wrestler, or maybe hit by a rogue meteorite. But here's the kicker. No external injuries. It was like they got Hulk smashed from the inside out. Add in reports of glowing orange spheres in the sky that night, and you've got yourself a Russian X-Files episode. Fast forward 35 years, and guess what? Deja vu hit Siberia. Welcome to the Kamar-Daban mountain range, August 1993. This time it was a group of 7 led by the legendary Emilia Korina. Picture her as a Russian Bear Grylls, but without the reality TV crew to help. Karina was tough as nails and her students idolized her, probably because she could lead them through a blizzard and still make them feel bad about complaining. The group was off to a good start, hiking up to a peak that stood a lofty 7,861 feet tall. But then Mother Nature decided to spice things up. On August the 4th, a storm rolled in, bringing relentless rain, high winds, and the kind of cyclone that makes you question your life choices. Now, any seasoned outdoors person would know that the smart move is to head below the tree line, build a fire, and wait out the storm. But Karina?
Let's head toward that barren wind-blasted ridge instead.
Because nothing screams good shelter like a place with zero cover and maximum exposure to the elements. What happened next? Well, stay tuned, because the bizarre, tragic, and unexplainable details of this case make Dyatlov Pass look like a summer camp ghost story. The group endured a bleak and hostile night, exposed to the howling winds and icy rain that left them drenched and trembling. Hypothermia crept through their bodies as they huddled together, unable to spark a fire or find any real shelter in the barren, moonlight terrain. As dawn finally broke, their nightmare was far from over. It was about to take a sinister, almost paranormal turn. As they began moving, one of the hikers, Chryson, who had been trailing at the back of the group, suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. Blood spurted from his eyes and ears, mixing with froth as he collapsed to the ground in violent convulsions. Karina rushed to his side, desperately trying to save him, but it was too late. His lifeless body lay frozen in an expression of pure agony.
Chryson, no, stay with me.
Then Karina herself began to scream as a sharp pain shot through her body. Blood poured from her eyes and mouth, and she collapsed onto Chryson's body, her limbs contorting violently. Filipenko, standing nearby, was next. Gasping for air, she crawled to a nearby rock and, in an act of incomprehensible desperation, bashed her head against it repeatedly until she went still. Zova and Banov, overcome by the same horrific symptoms, ran wildly down the mountainside, their bodies convulsing and twisting. They clawed at their throats, tearing at their clothes before collapsing lifelessly. Meanwhile, Shakin and Utko had no time to react before succumbing to the same violent illness. But Utko managed something the others couldn't. She ran. Stumbling and trembling, she made her way down the treacherous terrain, eventually finding some tree cover to set up a makeshift shelter for the night. Terrified and exhausted, she stayed awake until dawn. When she finally returned to the site of her friends' deaths the next day, the scene was a nightmare. Lifeless bodies, partially undressed, scattered across the mountain. Fighting through her grief and fear, Utko scavenged supplies from the dead and began her harrowing journey to find help. For 4 agonizing days, Utko followed power lines and a river, her resolve fueled only by the hope of rescue. On August 9th, she was discovered by a group of Ukrainian kayakers. Weak and delirious, she was taken to a nearby police station where a report was filed. It took 2 days of helicopter searches before the bodies of the hikers were found on August 24. The official autopsies determined that most of the hikers died from hypothermia, though bruised lungs and other signs of trauma complicated the narrative. Karina's death, in particular, was ruled a heart attack, yet the bizarre symptoms, frothing mouths, convulsions, and blood pouring from orifices, seemed to suggest something far more sinister. Speculation ran wild. Some likened the incident to the infamous Dyatlov Pass mystery, pointing to UFO sightings and alleged extraterrestrial activity. Others proposed military experiments, suggesting the hikers stumbled upon a secret test site for nerve agents or other deadly substances. Nerve agents, such as Novichok, a family of chemicals known to be the deadliest in existence, have been linked to the area. Symptoms like frothing mouths, convulsions, and lung damage align disturbingly well with nerve gas poisoning. Alternatively, some pointed to contamination from nearby Lake Baikal, a known toxic waste dumping ground. Could the hikers have unknowingly consumed poisoned water, or was their demise orchestrated by a shadowy government cover-up? The truth remains elusive, obscured by conflicting reports and theories. Were these hikers victims of a tragic accident, a sinister experiment, or something beyond comprehension? One thing is certain, the Kamar Daban incident was no ordinary hiking trip gone wrong. It stands as one of the most chilling mysteries of our time. An echo of the Dyatlov Pass tragedy that continues to haunt and baffle investigators to this day.
Hold on!
Josh kept his foot pressed hard on the accelerator, swerving to avoid obstacles on the rugged forest path. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his heart pounding like a drum as his friends yelled and his younger brother sobbed uncontrollably. The creature, a monstrous wolf-like beast, was no longer trailing them but cutting through the field on the left, heading straight for the Jeep. Its enormous size and glowing red eyes were unlike anything Josh had ever seen or imagined. It moved with terrifying speed and purpose, its dark fur shimmering faintly as it closed the gap.
Hold on!
Josh shouted as he steered hard to the right, narrowly avoiding a massive tree root jutting from the path. The Jeep jolted violently, throwing everyone in their seats. The boys screamed as the beast veered closer. Josh stole another glance at the rearview mirror, his breath catching in his throat. The creature was now bounding alongside them, mere feet away, its sharp teeth bared in a menacing snarl.
Faster, Josh! It's gonna catch us!
I'm going as fast as I can.
Josh snapped, his mind racing for options. The narrow forest path offered little room to maneuver, and the uneven terrain made speeding up even more dangerous. Suddenly, the beast lunged, its massive form hurtling toward the Jeep. Its claws scraped against the metal door, leaving deep gashes as it tried to grab hold. Josh swerved again, sending the creature tumbling to the ground, but it quickly recovered, its glowing eyes locking onto them with unrelenting fury. The road finally opened up to a slightly wider dirt path near the edge of the forest.
We're almost out.
Josh yelled, more to himself than anyone else. He pushed the Jeep harder, the engine groaning under the strain, but the creature wasn't giving up. It bolted ahead, disappearing into the thick brush. For a brief moment, the boys thought they'd lost it. Then, without warning, the beast burst onto the path directly in front of them, blocking the way. Josh slammed on the brakes, the Jeep skidding to a stop just feet from the monstrous figure. The creature stood on its hind legs, towering over the vehicle. Its glowing red eyes pierced through the windshield, and its low, guttural growl sent chills down their spines. For a moment, everything was still. The forest eerily silent, the boys frozen in terror.
What do we do?
Hold on!
Josh yelled, slamming the gear into reverse. The Jeep roared backward, the tires kicking up dirt and rocks. The creature roared in response, dropping to all fours and charging after them. Suddenly, the path behind them forked to the left. Without hesitation, Josh turned sharply, the Jeep lurching as it careened down the unfamiliar trail. The narrow path was overgrown and treacherous, but Josh kept going, praying the creature wouldn't be able to follow. For several agonizing minutes, the only sounds were the crunching of branches under the tires and the boys' ragged breathing. Finally, they broke through the tree line and onto a paved road. Josh didn't stop. He drove as fast as the Jeep would go, not daring to look back until they reached the safety of the main highway. When they finally pulled over, all six of them sat in stunned silence, trying to process what had just happened.
What the hell was that thing?
Josh didn't have an answer. None of them did, but one thing was clear. They had encountered something far beyond their understanding, something that didn't belong in the natural world. That day, their service project was abandoned, and the Sam Crocker Cemetery was left untouched. The boys never spoke of the incident again, but the memory of that monstrous creature haunted them for years to come. Josh's heart was pounding as he sat in the Scoutmaster's kitchen, surrounded by park rangers and people in suits who radiated authority. The room felt suffocating, and he couldn't decide if it was the weight of their stares or the sheer impossibility of what had happened that day. The female in the pantsuit leaned forward, her tone calm but firm.
Josh, we need to make this very clear. What you saw out there, it wasn't what you think. For the safety of yourself, your family, and everyone else, we need you to stick to a simple story. It was a bear, a big rabid bear, nothing more.
But it wasn't a bear.
Listen, kid. You want your Eagle Scout badge, right? You want this all to go away? Then you tell everyone it was a bear. No two legs, no glowing eyes, no... other details and you keep it to yourself. Forever.
Okay.
Josh hesitated, his mind racing. He didn't want to lie, but the weight of their words and the unspoken threats was impossible to ignore. He nodded reluctantly.
Good. You're a smart kid, Josh. Just remember, some things are better left unexplored, and believe me, the truth isn't always what people want to hear.
The man with glasses smiled faintly, as if relieved. Josh left the Scoutmaster's house that day feeling a strange mix of fear and relief. He'd get his badge and the whole ordeal would be swept under the rug. But the memory of that creature, and the shadowy people who seemed to know more than they were letting on, would haunt him for years to come. For a while he kept the secret, repeating the cover story whenever anyone asked.
It was just a bear.
Though the words felt hollow every time. But as he grew older, the weight of that lie became unbearable. The world deserved to know the truth, even if it sounded insane. Years later, as an adult, Josh decided to share his story anonymously, hoping that someone out there might believe him, or better yet, have answers. He wasn't looking for fame or validation. He just wanted to unburden himself from the truth he'd carried alone for so long. The details of that day, the snarling smile of the creature, the glowing eyes, the sheer impossibility of its movements, remained vivid in his mind. And though he never returned to the Sam Crocker Cemetery, he couldn't help but wonder, was it still out there? And what else were those park rangers and mysterious agents trying to hide? Thanks for watching our video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel.